Hello YouTube, Goddard Radio Moscow here again with another beer review for you, as is usual. We're continuing on with the Scottish series of beer reviews that I've been doing for you, or the Scottish Beer Month as I've called it. So this is going to be video number 16 in that series of beer reviews. We're nearing the halfway mark in this, but for this one we are going to go to the Isle of Skye, to the little town of Uig, and we're going to go to the Isle of Skye Brewing Company and have a taste of their red Cuillin ale, which is meant to be a very, very nice one. This brewery are actually a fairly older Scottish craft brewery. They're nearly 20 years old, although oddly enough I hadn't heard of them until very, very recently. So they should be one that you can get on export in some of the countries. Some of those of you who watch my reviews from different places in the world, you may come across this guy. So as is usual then with my beer reviews, I'll take you through a very brief history of the brewery. It is quite short, but if you don't want to stay with me for that, feel free to fast forward a few minutes into the video and you will get straight to the tasting section. The brewery website is in the video description for you below, along with a link to my other reviews that I will add from the Isle of Skye Brewery in the near future. So anyway, the Isle of Skye Brewery was founded in April 1995 by Angus McRory and Stephen Tinney, who were both teachers at Portree High School. Now the production began in December 1995 in their purpose-built facility at the ferry pier in Uig. Now Stephen sold his share in the brewery to Angus towards the end of 1996, and the brewing operation is actually now overseen by head brewer Pam Jones, who was trained up in the brew house and is also assisted by Norrie MacLeod. So that team basically learned on the job, if you like. But the brewery now has a 30-barrel brew plant manufactured by Macmillans of Edinburgh, who are the very famous coppersmiths that produce the copper kettles at the Caledonian Brewery in Edinburgh. Probably the most well-known brewery in Scotland, actually. One of them actually, I should say. But they produce up to 60 barrels of beer per week and have fermentation capacity of up to 80 barrels and also a conditioning capacity of 100 barrels. So you can see just how much the Isle of Skye Brewery has grown in a fairly kind of short period of time. But they installed a new bottling facility in 1998, which was also when Angus gave up his teaching job for good. Now demand for the beer soon proved to be so great that they had to begin brewing and bottling under contract at the Belhaven Brewery, which I believe is down near Glasgow somewhere. But the beers are now available all throughout Scotland, and they're also being exported to the US, Canada, Japan, New Zealand and Iceland as well. Although oddly enough I never saw them when I was up in Iceland, and all of the alcohol shops in Iceland are owned by the government, so I'm surprised that I never came across these beers. But those of you who are watching my reviews from those countries, you hopefully can pick up one of these beers and let me know in the comment section your own thoughts on those here. It's always interesting to hear from my subscribers. But just to list the other beers you can get from the Isle of Skye Brewing Company, obviously you get this guy, the red Cuillin here, you get the black Cuillin as well, which is a stout beer, the Young Pretender, Blaven, Hebridean Gold, which is a golden ale, or both of those are golden ales, sorry, Cuillin Beast, which is a strong ale, Lord of the Ales, which is a golden ale, Oyster Stout, and Skye's Grand, which Skye's Grand is an anniversary ale, and you also get Skylight, which is their summer seasonal beer. So let's get on to the tasting of this guy itself. This one is a 4.2% Scottish red bitter, apparently was the style it was described at. Let me just bring the artwork up and let you have a little quick look at that. Really nice looking beer, actually, very nicely presented. It reminds me, there's quite a few kind of Scottish breweries who present their beers like this. Very, very nicely presented beer. It's got quite an interesting bottle cap on the top of this one as well. They're a nice blue one there, so I'll be keeping that and adding it to my collection. You can actually, I should point that out to you, a lot of those of you who watch in different countries, you will notice on the bottom of this beer that it is presented in Gaelic. So I think it's just saying at the top it's the same as it says in English, brewed on the Isle of Skye, Scotland. So it looks, it's Scottish Gaelic. It's a shame, you know, it's a kind of dying out language. We really should be taught it when we're very young, but that was the whole thing. When I was at school we weren't taught Scottish history a lot, which was really quite bad, because the British government were very scared of Scottish nationalism because of all the oil we've got up here pretty much, and that's how it goes. They don't teach you, if all else fails, don't teach the people the history of these things, which is a real shame. But we'll get on to the tasting of this beer now. So a 4.2% red bitter, if you like, from Scotland. So we'll get it out and get on with the tasting. Cheers! A nice smoky opening there, and we'll just get it out. It says on the back of the bottle it's a nice tawny red ale, this one, which I can see it's coming out a nice kind of mahogany colour here. We'll just leave a little bit of it in the glass just now, so we can have a look at the colour and stuff like that when I bring up the light here. As you can see, it's poured a nice, I would definitely say it's fair to describe this beer as mahogany. There's a lot of little bubbles of carbonation are visible in this. You can see it's maybe about a half finger of a kind of creamy off-white head on this one. Really attractive looking. If I put my fingers behind it, it is, I would say it's transparent, but I'm not sure how well you can see that on the camera. I think you can just see a little bit of my fingers through the back of this, but it's not really opaque at all. Mainly a transparent coloured beer, this one. Very attractive looking actually, and you can just see quite a mahogany coloured beer. I'll just bring it over. You can maybe see it a little bit better, but I'll put it back down so you can actually see the rest of the beer now. But let's give it a smell and see how we get on here. So without kind of sugaring it up a little bit, you do get an element of kind of cereal spice, which is what you normally expect from a bitter. You normally expect it to have a fairly kind of cereal, spicy element to the malt base. There's a little bit of kind of roasted caramel coming out in there as well, again, which is sometimes what you expect of a red bitter beer, particularly of a red beer, not so much of a bitter I should say. It's more the spicy bready character you expect from that. So yeah, quite a nice, slightly roasted caramel character that's coming out of this one. A lot of roasted kind of bready malts actually in this is what's coming out, but nice caramel and toffee aromas in there. Definitely a little bit of the kind of cereal spice that you would expect from a bitter beer. A little bit of nutty aroma as well. Maybe you're getting on the hoppier end of the beer. You can pick up just a little bit of kind of red, sweet berry fruits almost. And there is a bit of floral character in there too from the hops. But definitely it's quite an interesting one. Definitely it almost reminds me a little bit of some of the darker Scottish ales actually. Quite an interesting beer this one, so if you do happen to try it, just take a little bit of time and try and get yourself used to the aroma here. I'll just get the rest of this guy poured now and then we can get on with the tasting section. As you can see, it does pour very, very nicely, and I really do like how this beer smells actually, so we'll get on with the tasting here. You can maybe get a little bit of a better look at the head now. It's a solid kind of half finger of a slightly off-white creamy head, so let's give it a taste and see how we get on here. Cheers. Yeah, very, very light beer actually on first impressions. Very light, very smooth, but the first element of the flavour that comes out is definitely the sort of bitter, not bitter, sorry, the kind of spicy, bready character that you normally expect of a red bitter beer. So yeah, very, very light beer, very wet mouthfeel actually. That's the other thing that's kind of coming out. But it does actually have that really nice kind of big bready kind of malt base that you expect of a bitter beer, and the cereal spice just comes in and kind of sits on the back of the tongue there. Very, very nicely done actually. There is a little bit of a kind of caramelly and maybe toffee-ish element to it, the sort of brown sugars that you would expect of the red ale. But it's not very sweet. It kind of mixes very well with that bready and spicy malt base in there. It is very, very mild actually. Those are the main components of the beer. There's not really much in the way of a hoppy character coming out of this one, I think. There is just a teeny tiny little bit of reddish fruit that comes out on the front of the tongue. You just feel this little bubble moving towards the front of the tongue, and you just get a little bit of kind of slight, almost a little tiny bit of strawberry flavour, maybe a little bit of other kind of berries in there. Not very sharp at all, very, very mild. Mainly your flavour, as I say, is that kind of spicy, bready yeast base on the main part of the tongue, right at the back of the tongue there. There really isn't very much hop character to this at all actually. But yeah, definitely a very, really that's all I can really say about it. It's a big sort of yeasty bready one. Around the edges of the tongue you're getting just a tiny little bit of that sort of bready spice that you expect, but that's mainly towards the back of the tongue actually, and it kind of spreads itself around there. The spicy base goes just right up the middle of the tongue with a little bit of caramel in there, and around the edges there's maybe a teeny little bit of floral character, but this is a more malty beer than anything else. There's not much of a hop element to it at all, and I could perhaps say that there's a bit of a floral kind of aromatic-y character to it, but it really isn't very pungent at all. Mainly it's a big kind of bready, spicy bitter beer. A lot of cereal spice in there, with just a little bit of the kind of sweet caramel in there. I do think the caramel comes out a little bit more as you take a few more sips of it. Yeah, the caramel does come out just a little bit, but again, very, very mild. And I actually do think now that after having a few kind of gulps of this beer, the kind of berryish fruit comes out a little bit more on the front of the tongue. But it's a very light beer for a bitter actually. The mouthfeel on it is quite light bodied. It is very, very smooth, although the carbonation does kind of have a little bit of a prickle to it. Mainly at the end of the beer when you're getting the kind of fruity character out, but at the same time it does help bring out the spicy element that you expect of the bitter. So it's quite an interesting one in that regard. It maybe has just a slightly little bit of an oily character to it, but it's it is more of a kind of wet mouthfeel, I would say. There is a fair little bit of dry character from the hop at the end, and that kind of comes out a little bit more in the aftertaste. And in fairness to it, I'm saying there's not so much of a kind of hop element to the beer, but in the aftertaste you do get a little bit more of a kind of light kind of florally hop coming out to it, and that it just sits around the edge of the tongue there. Maybe I've been drinking it just a little bit too fast in terms of the review, but I do think now there is a little bit of a sort of florally character, just very light floral character around the edge of the tongue there. So in a way it's a fairly kind of complex beer. I'm doing this review quite kind of short and sweet, I guess, but it does have, I would say it's a little bit sweeter. The fruit character as you go through it does come out just a little bit more as you take more and more of it. You get the sweetness of that just a little bit more. Perhaps as it warms you start to get a little bit more of the sweetness coming out of it, the kind of fruity sweetness. But I mean, overall, it's another kind of quite interesting beer. I'd really love to try their stout. I mean, the Black Cuillin is the one that I kind of heard was a very, very good beer from these guys. I've not really heard this one mentioned before. I picked it because I didn't have a red ale in this series of beer reviews, and I do have the stout actually. So maybe I'll review that for you before I actually go on this trip to Australia. These videos are filmed in advance, of course, to be put up during my travels away. But I might do that one before I head to Australia, so you might see that one already. But I hope you've enjoyed this beer review. It's quite an interesting one, this. I do recommend you try some of the Isle of Skye beers. They are quite highly rated. This one, I have to admit, I think would be really interesting to try on the cask and just see how the malt character, maybe you get a little bit more caramel out on it, and the hop character, I would say, in the bottled version is very, very mild. Maybe the cask version would have a little bit more hoppiness to it, which would maybe balance it out a wee bit more. But it's quite an interesting one to try nonetheless, and it's one that I would say you need to kind of have a few more gulps of and things, and just let all the flavours come out and kind of take it in fully. And I think I was jumping a little bit to conclusions with this one over a bit, but it's quite a nice beer actually. It's a fairly nice light and sessionable one, which is quite unusual for a sort of red bitter, if you like. Usually I find bitters you just want to have one and kind of have it kind of as a dessert beer or something like that, but this one I think would be a fairly sessionable one. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this beer review, and as I say, check out some of the other Isle of Skye beers that you can get from them. I'm going to review the stout for you, I think, before I head away to Australia now that I've tried this one, and we'll see how we get on with that. I'm sure hopefully you'll enjoy that review as well. But thanks again for watching my beer reviews. As always, please let me know in the comments section your own thoughts on this beer if you do happen to have tried it. I hope you've enjoyed the review, and please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. I really hope you're enjoying this series of Scottish beer reviews, and I will be back soon with more Scottish beer reviews, and I'll do some Australian things when I arrive down there. Cheers.